Red Bull built a championship-winning machine, and now it might be too heavy to win. We are talking about a car that cannot rotate the way it should, a driver like Max Verstappen being forced to hold back instead of attack, and a team already pushing emergency changes just a few races into a brand new era. But here is the part that changes everything. This is not just a Red Bull problem. This is what happens when Formula One's new rules force every team into heavier, more complex cars, where even the smallest weight imbalance can destroy performance. And inside the paddock, there is growing concern that this is not something you can fix quickly, or maybe not at all. Because if Red Bull cannot solve it, then nobody can. Stay with me, because what Ford and Verstappen are doing right now could decide whether this season is already lost. Subscribe now, because this story gets even bigger. At first, it did not make sense. Red Bull was not supposed to struggle like this. Not after everything they built. Not after years of dominance. Not with a driver like Verstappen. And yet, from the very first laps, something felt wrong. The car was not responding the way it should. Not sharp enough. Not precise enough. And in Formula One, that is everything. Because when a driver turns the wheel, they expect an immediate reaction. Instant. Clean. Exact. But with the RB22, there is a delay. A fraction of a second. Small, but critical. And Verstappen feels it more than anyone. Because his entire driving style depends on that front-end bite. That aggressive turn-in. That confidence to attack the corner without hesitation. But now, that confidence is not there. And when confidence disappears, performance follows. But here is where things become even more revealing. Because this is not just about feel. It is measurable. In corner entry speed. In mid-corner balance. In how quickly the car changes direction. The RB22 is losing time in places where Red Bull used to dominate. And that tells you something important. This is not a power issue. This is not straight-line speed. This is mechanical. Fundamental. And it all comes back to one thing. Weight. But not just total weight. Where that weight sits. Because the new regulations force teams into a very specific direction. Bigger batteries. More electrical systems. More cooling requirements. All of it concentrated in critical areas of the car. And that shifts the balance. Forward. Backward. Higher. Lower. Every small change affects how the car behaves. And Red Bull got caught in that balance. But here is the part that makes this even more serious. Other teams adapted better. They found ways to distribute that weight more effectively. To keep the car stable, responsive, predictable. And Red Bull did not. At least not yet. Which is why the gap is starting to appear. Not massive. Not obvious at first. But growing. Lap after lap. Session after session. And Verstappen knows it. You can hear it in the way he speaks. More controlled. More analytical. Less instinctive. Because he is no longer just driving. He is compensating. Adjusting his inputs. Changing braking points. Modifying how he approaches corners. All to work around a car that is not doing what he expects. And that is the worst situation for any driver. Because instead of extracting performance, you are managing limitations. But this is where the story takes a turn. Because Red Bull is not accepting this. Not even close. They are already pushing for changes. Not small tweaks. Not minor updates. Fundamental adjustments. Working closely with Ford. Analyzing every component. Every kilogram. Every detail that could be optimized. Because they understand something crucial. If they do not fix this early, it becomes exponentially harder later. Because in Formula One, once a concept falls behind, catching up is not linear. It is almost impossible. But here is where it becomes even more complex. Because reducing weight is not just about making parts lighter. It is about redesigning systems. Rebalancing the car. Sometimes even sacrificing other areas of performance. Cooling efficiency. Reliability. Energy deployment. Everything is connected. And every change creates another problem. Which means Red Bull is now in a constant trade-off. Gain here. Lose there. Improve balance. Risk stability. And Verstappen is right in the middle of that process. Driving a car that is evolving race by race. Sometimes improving. Sometimes revealing new weaknesses. And that creates uncertainty. But here is the key detail. This is happening at the worst possible time. At the start of a new regulation cycle. When the foundations are being set. Because if you get the foundation wrong, everything built on top of it carries that flaw. And that is exactly what Red Bull is trying to avoid. But the real question is, can they fix it in time? Or has the RB22 already locked itself into a direction that is too difficult to change? Because what happens next does not just define Red Bull's season. It defines whether they remain a dominant force, or become another team trying to catch up. And that answer is closer than it seems. Because now, the situation is starting to shift from concern to pressure. Real pressure. Not just inside Red Bull. Across the entire paddock. Because when a team like Red Bull shows weakness, everyone pays attention. And suddenly, what looked like a small issue becomes a reference point. Other teams start asking the same question. If they are struggling with weight, what does that say about our car? Because this is not a problem you can isolate. It is built into the regulations themselves. The same rules, the same constraints, the same limitations every team is dealing with. And that changes how this story is perceived. This is no longer just about Red Bull getting something wrong. It is about how close every team is to the same problem. But here is where it becomes even more intense. Because while Red Bull is trying to fix the car, their rivals are moving forward, improving, optimizing, finding performance. And in Formula One, standing still is the same as falling behind. Which means Red Bull is now fighting on two fronts, fixing internal issues, while trying not to lose ground externally. And that is one of the hardest positions any team can be in. Because development resources are limited, time is limited, and every decision matters. Do you focus on solving the weight issue? Or do you chase performance in other areas? Do you redesign? Or do you adapt? And every wrong choice costs you races. But here is where Verstappen becomes the key piece of the puzzle. Because he is not just driving the car, he is defining its direction. Every piece of feedback, every adjustment, every complaint, shapes how the team responds. And when a driver like him says something is wrong, the team listens. Immediately. But even Verstappen is facing a limit. Because there is only so much a driver can compensate for. Only so much you can adjust with technique. And when the limitation is structural, driving alone cannot fix it. Which leads to a moment every dominant team eventually faces. The realization that they are no longer ahead. They are reacting. And that is a completely different mindset. Because dominance gives you control. Reaction puts you under pressure. And pressure changes how decisions are made. Faster. More aggressive. Sometimes riskier. But this is where the story takes another turn. Because Ford is now fully involved. Not just as a future partner, but as an active part of the solution. Analyzing systems. Working on efficiency. Looking at how energy and weight interact inside the car. Because in this new era, power and weight are directly connected. The more electric performance you want, the more weight you carry. And balancing that equation is becoming one of the biggest challenges in Formula One. But here is the detail that changes everything. Even if Red Bull finds performance, even if they reduce the impact of the weight, they might not fully eliminate it. Because the architecture of the car was decided months ago, locked in, built around assumptions that are now being questioned. And changing that is not something you do mid-season. It is something that takes time, a lot of it. Which means Red Bull is now racing against something invisible. Not just their competitors, but their own design choices. And that is where the tension reaches its peak. Because every race now becomes a signal. Is the car improving? Or are the limits becoming clearer? Is Verstappen pushing more? Or still holding back? Is the gap closing? Or slowly opening? And each answer builds toward one conclusion. Because sooner or later, there will be a moment where everything becomes obvious. Not in data, not in meetings, but on track. A moment where the RB22 either looks like a contender again, or confirms that something deeper is wrong. And when that moment arrives, there will be no more questions, only answers. And those answers will not just define Red Bull's season. They will reveal something much bigger. Whether this new era of Formula One is rewarding the best teams, or exposing the limits of the system itself. And this is where everything finally reaches a breaking point. Because up to now, Red Bull could still believe this was temporary. A setup issue. A learning phase. Something they would solve with updates. But there is one moment in every season where reality becomes impossible to ignore. And for Red Bull, that moment is getting closer. Because the data is no longer ambiguous. The patterns are repeating. The same weaknesses. The same limitations. The same feeling in the car. Race after race. And when a problem repeats itself in Formula One, it is no longer a coincidence. It is a characteristic. And that is the most dangerous thing a team can face. Because you cannot fix a characteristic. You can only work around it, minimize it, hide it. But it is always there, underneath everything. And this is where Verstappen's role becomes even more critical. Because now, it is not just about performance. It is about trust. Does he trust the car when he turns in? Does he trust it under braking? Does he trust it when he pushes beyond the limit? And if the answer is not a clear yes, then the car has already lost something essential. Because at this level, confidence is everything. Without it, you are always holding something back, even if it is just a fraction. And that fraction is the difference between winning and losing. But here is where the situation becomes even more uncomfortable. Because Red Bull is starting to realize that fixing this might require more than evolution. It might require a rethink, a deeper change. Not just lighter components, not just better balance, but a different approach to the car itself. And that is not something you do mid-season. That is something that takes time, resources, and difficult decisions. Because if you admit the concept is limiting you, you are also admitting that your rivals may have chosen better. And in Formula One, that realization changes everything. But this is where the final tension builds. Because while Red Bull is questioning its direction, other teams are becoming more confident, more aggressive, more comfortable with their cars. And that shift is visible, not in headlines, but in lap times, in consistency, in how drivers attack corners without hesitation. And that contrast is what defines the moment. One team searching for answers, others starting to believe they already have them. But here is the part that connects everything. This is not just Red Bull's story. This is what happens when a regulation pushes teams into extreme compromises. Weight versus performance. Complexity versus control. Innovation versus drivability. And not every team finds the same balance. Some get it right, some get close, and some miss it. But the difference between those outcomes is not small. It defines entire seasons, entire eras. And that is why what happens next is so important. Because Red Bull is approaching a point where they have to decide. Do they keep refining this concept, hoping to unlock its potential? Or do they accept its limits and start preparing something different? Because one path leads to recovery, the other leads to compromise. And in Formula One, compromise is the beginning of decline. So now everything builds toward one final moment. The moment where the RB22 shows its true identity. Not flashes of speed, not isolated performances, but consistency, clarity, confidence. Because if that moment never comes, then the conclusion becomes unavoidable. This is not a temporary problem. This is the car. And if that is true, then Red Bull is not chasing performance anymore. They are chasing a solution to something that cannot be fully solved. And that is when a dominant team becomes vulnerable. Not because they forgot how to win, but because the system they are in no longer works in their favor. And that is when everything changes.